This is the fifth and final installment of my description of the 5 tiers of my creative hierarchy. The previous videos have looked at the 5th tier, which is the therapeutic creative, and the 4th tier, which is the hobbyist creative, the 3rd tier, which is the professional creative, the 2nd tier, which is the amateur creative, and I refer you to that one because it covered a lot of what's involved with this top tier, which is the artist creative, the artistic creative. An artist is someone who is completely loyal to the inner dynamic of his or her being. In other words, what drives the artist is making outward expressions of what they are feeling internally. What an artist does is, an artist doesn't offer opinions, by the way. That's a misnomer that comes up a lot with artists. Artists are not out there giving their opinions. What artists are doing is that they're taking their experience and they're translating it in an external form. Now, the external form may not be directly related to that experience, but it is a truism that is also true that all art is autobiographical. Because even if an artist decides to look at one object or another to discuss within his or her art, they are doing so because it's going to express some feeling that the artist has. An artist is moved by feeling. And then the artist has the technical facility to communicate what that feeling was. So the artist can put it into form. Joseph Campbell has a great definition of an artist. He says an artist is a mystic plus craft. So in other words, what a mystic does is they just experience life. An example of a mystic that most everybody's familiar with is like Christ. That was mystical. The reason why Christ was crucified is because he didn't put it in a form. He just put himself out there completely. Now that's the ultimate sacrifice and really the greatest work of mysticism and art for the world, because the fashioning of that story has ended up being really the basis of all Western art. It comes from that. The insight of the artist is always an insight where it is finding the eternal in linear time, in the temporal. So finding eternity in the moment. That's what an artist does. Because of the seriousness of the artist's attitude, he cannot or she cannot work with a commercial motivation. So an artist cannot compromise. I mean, they can't in order to do their work. They're the highest in the hierarchy because they have all the skill of the professional and they have all the idealism of the amateur. But they have that combination of that purity of intent and that really high technical skill in order to communicate what it is that they're feeling. The art that they produce should not be confused with the artist. Just because the artist can communicate with great depth and insight about the nature of reality, it does not mean that the artist has that understanding within him or herself. So art is separate from the artist. You know, Picasso did some breathtakingly spiritual work, and he also put cigarettes out on his lover's arm. You know, I mean, there is no, the artist has no claim to superiority. But that being said, everyone is not an artist. There are certain people that touch the ground of being that are able to communicate in such a way on a higher level of meaning. So that's really what the artist is. In the amateur video, because much of this has been about the relationship of creativity to money, I mean, not completely, but that's obviously part of it, and that was discussed in the amateur video. The artist wants to make as much money as possible, but he is constitutionally incapable of making choices just simply to make money when creating his or her art. As I said in the amateur video, art itself usually makes money, maybe not for the artist, but usually it has such tremendous influence that it filters down to the other tiers and it ends up making money. So that is the top level, that's the top tier, that's what art is. Artist, that's the artist tier of the creative hierarchy. Okay, thank you. That completes the 5-part series on my creative hierarchy.